Hello and welcome back to Web Design for Small Business. In this video, part 24, Multilingual, we're going to be talking about creating multiple language options for our website. What this means is basically the website will be available in multiple languages. Now, if you don't need your website to have more than just one language, you can skip this one. However, some of the changes that we will be making may confuse you later on, so you might want to still watch it and just kind of skip through, just so you understand why things look different beyond this video. So anyway, if we take a look at our website, pretty happy with the layout, but what we're going to do is at the top right corner up here, we're going to have a small list of little country flags, and when you click on the country flag, it will change the language of the site. We will also add that option into your account options. So when you go to create an account or you go to modify your account, you'll have an option for a language in there as well, and that way every time you log in it will save your language preference. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is choose what languages we want, and then we need to actually find what we do with that. So the first thing is w3schools.com. If you go to their site, click on the HTML tutorial at the top right and scroll down their left side menu until you go to HTML language codes at the bottom under HTML references, and that will give you a complete list of the 2-digit country codes for each language. So while these are names of countries, this is considered a language code. And why that is important is because we're actually going to label our code as being in a different language. So figure out what languages you want to support and copy the 2-digit code down for it. Once you do that, then we need to hunt down the flags for those countries. So I have gone ahead and made a list. I am going to turn our site into one that supports 5 languages. So we will have English, French, German, Ukrainian, and Chinese. Why those specific ones? It's more of a regional thing. That's what I feel most people in this region speak if they're not 99% English. Being in Canada, our official languages are both English and French, so I try to include those two. And then we do have a lot of German-speaking people, and as well we do have a rather large Ukrainian population nearby. And then because it is a Chinese restaurant, it's nice to actually have Chinese. And now there are 2 types of Chinese, simplified and traditional. I'm going with traditional. I honestly don't know the difference between the two, except that it just seems like the simplified language has fewer accents in the characters, which to me would make it harder for somebody who speaks Chinese or reads Chinese to be able to understand it. And I'm honestly thinking that the simplified language came out before graphics were capable of actually displaying and rendering greater detail. So I think it was born out of necessity of the time and is now kind of dated. So wherever possible, I like to stick with traditional. I could be wrong. Like I said, I don't actually speak the language. Now, when we're actually dealing with the translations, this is something I kind of want to bring up beforehand. There are 3 basic ways you can do it. Number 1, the cheap and quick way, and that's just using some kind of free translation service like Google Translate. On the opposite end of the spectrum is actually paying a translator to translate every single piece of text. That can get costly if you don't speak the languages yourself, but it is the best way to do it because you can, if you think of it this way, each language has its own sets of words, and there aren't direct translations for each word or phrase. So something that makes perfect sense in one language, when you translate it to another language, can make absolutely no sense at all, or it can make some sense, but isn't the best way of saying it. So having somebody who fluently speaks that language write the script for you can write it in a way that's very fluent for people who speak that language, and that's something you can't get out of a free translator. Now, the second step, which is the one kind of in between the two, is what I call the simplified cheap translation. So you find one of those free translation services and you translate it, but then you take that translated version and you translate it back, and what you'll often find isn't the same thing. So when you translate it from, say, English to French and then back from French to English, the one that you started with and the new one that you get after being doubly translated aren't the same. So what you want to do is you want to reword it until basically when you're translating it back and forth, it no longer changes. So it's getting the exact same thing going back and forth. So, most of the time you're going to have to basically dumb down the words you're using, simplify your sentence structure and everything, but it might seem more basic, but then it's more directly translated and easier to read. There's basically less that can get lost in the translation. So that's the method we're going to use. All right. So anyway, the next step is because we want to use the actual country flags for our little buttons, we need to find a page that can do that. So I found this little site called countryflags.io, and they offer an API service where you can get country flags in various sizes. So this right here is their API. Now, I'm not a very trusting person, so I don't exactly trust that this nice little free site is going to survive forever. So I don't want to have to rely on them for my images. So I'm basically going to use their site to get the images, but then I'm going to host them myself. So how do we find the images? Well, we use their API here. So basically, you type in https://www.countryflags.io/ the 2-digit country code / the style that you want, which will either be flat or shiny, / the size of the image .png. So I went with 64, which is 64 pixels as the width. It says 64 by 64, so I assume because these are PNG format that it just has transparencies at the top and bottom to make it take up a square space, but it'll still be visibly rectangular. They're not squares. All right, so leaving that at 64, and we can select that. Basically, type this in and then just change what those two letters are. Now, if you need to find the country code, they list them here. Now, out of the ones that I chose, the country code letters were the exact same, except when it came to the Ukraine. W3 Schools listed the country code as UK, and here they have it listed as UA. But if you type it in, so countryflags.io/de/ and I did shiny /64.png, and it gets you this. Then if you right click on that, save image as, and then you can save the image. Now I went through and I did that for all the flags that I wanted, but I did it for both the flat and shiny. The reason for that is I'm going to use the shiny ones as my mouse over effect. So when you hover over, it will change from the flat to the shiny. So we want to download both versions, and I did that here. So these are the 5 in the flat and the shiny. So the way that I labeled them is the 2-digit country code, then the number 64, and then for the shiny one I added an H after it to remind me that that's going to be a hover effect. So once we have those, then we can go back into our NetBeans, and in our image folder we're going to create a new folder. Actually cancel that, not in the image, just in the base directory. New folder, and we're going to call that lang, L-A-N-G. Finish. Okay. Then we're going to go to our JavaScript folder here, because it's the closest one. Right click on the index.php, copy that, right click on the language, and paste that. So we're copying the index file from JavaScript into lang. Just remember that PHP file, all that does is redirect us to the main page, so if somebody tries to go to that folder directly, they cannot. Now what we want to do is copy our images into that folder. And it will upload them for us. Okay, get rid of that window. Alright, so now we have those images and we need to do something with them. So the next thing is creating a PHP file for each language and adding some code in here. So the first thing I'm going to do is where our HTML is, so this is in our normal index.php file in the root, HTML space lang is equal to double quotes, and in those double quotes we're going to put PHP and echo $lang semicolon. So PHP echo lang is equal to that. Okay, you can save that. And in our Highway 45 PHP, create a new line under the JavaScript and if parentheses exclamation mark $lang. So if lang does not exist, curly bracers, lang is equal to $C square brackets single quotes lang and then if, and we're doing the exact same thing again, exclamation mark $lang, curly bracers, lang is set to en. Okay, so what this line will do, and I'm just going to put a comment after that, get language. So what this does is it checks to see if we have anything set for our lang. If lang is not set, then it requests it from our customer database. So if they have anything set as their language. If the language is still not set, then set it to English as our default. Okay, and after that, add another line and require /home / username / webroot /lang/ and then after the single quote, a dot, $lang, dot, single quotes, dot php. So basically what we're doing is we're selecting a language, and then we're going to require our language a PHP page in the language folder that has the name of that language. So now because we have that as require and it doesn't exist, that is going to break our site temporarily. So we need to go to language, new, PHP file, and we have to create an English language file. So worried for a second it wasn't in the language folder. Okay, so clearing that out. So now the first thing that we need to do in here, I'm just going to create a comment and type in English. Now underneath this, we need to create a lang variable that is set to en. Save that, and that right there should fix our website if it wasn't working. So if we go back to our website, hit refresh, it should still be working now, which is great. Going to go back to our home page temporarily. Okay, so now the next thing we want to do is we want to create some variables. So I actually pre-did this to save some time. So I'm going to copy and paste that, but I'm going to go through it. Okay, so what I'm doing here is I'm creating constants. So what we do is we use the function define and then a set of parentheses and a semicolon. Then within the function there are two elements. The first one is the constant. So in quotes. Now this, unlike a variable where a variable starts with a $sign, a constant does not. So it needs to start with a letter. It can be uppercase, lowercase. It can also have numbers in it and underscores. To keep it simple, I prefer to use all uppercase, and if it's multiple words, I'll use underscores as spaces. So that's the format that I use for those. And we want to go and create one constant for each field that we have. So our title, each menu item, and then I started with the home page. So this title, this box, and this block here. So how I worded those, I'll just move that back over, is title, then for each of the menu buttons, menu, location, order, admin, create account, login, logout, and my account. Because remember, if we're logged in, we don't see these two, but if we're logged out, we don't see. Sorry, if we're logged in, we don't see these two, and if we're logged out, we don't see those two. But all four exist, so we need to include all four. And then I did home underscore title, home underscore MSG for message, and home underscore blurb. And that's MSG for message, not monosodium glutamate, which is what that one is for. All right. So then you can get rid of that extra space. Just going to save that. And then if we go back into our index page, where we have our Highway 45 restaurant, I'm going to delete that, and I'm going to write in here, we need to do a PHP tag, and I'm going to go echo, and title, all uppercase, no $sign in front, semicolon after. So I'm echoing title. Save that and refresh. And notice nothing has changed. So although this now says title, it still says Highway 45 Restaurant. So we can go through and do that for all of them, but for testing purposes, I'm just going to stick with the title for now. The next thing we want to do is we want to add this space where we actually create our icons. So I'm going to create a new div after this. And I'm going to give it an ID equal to flags. So I'm going to create a span element. So just enter down to give this more space. Span. And this one is going to have an ID equal to EN. And I'm going to create another one. Span ID is equal to okay. Actually, lang, the ID will be lang hyphen. Okay. So in here, I am going to have an image tag, 2 images. And the source, https:// I'm going to put each one on a new line. .45.ca/lang/en. Oh, sorry. That is GB 64.png. And then this will have an ID is equal to flag-en. 1. And now I can just copy and paste that one to the second line, add my H, and I'm just going to change the 1 to a 2. I'm going to copy both of those and paste those in there, changing these. So now I'm just going to save that, see what it looks like. It's probably going to be pretty horrible. Yeah, it popped it down here, which is not what I want. That just made everything look horrible. Okay. So now we need to create some CSS for that flags. So if we go into our CSS, scroll down to the bottom here. So the first thing we need is our flags. So we want to give it a position. Absolute, top 0, right 0, padding 0, margin 0. I'm going to give this a Z index of 3, just to make sure that if there's any overlap between it and our text, this should show on top of the text. And line height, going to set that to 0.5 VW, and font size also 0.5 VW. This will more or less affect the spacing. Okay, so now we have spans underneath our flags div, and within each of those spans we have images. So we can either do each one of those spans by their IDs, or a simple way of doing that is flag space span, and this will affect all the spans under the flags ID'd div. And we're just going to give this a margin of 0 and padding of 0. So we're trying to shove them all together so that they take up less space. And then finally, flag span image. So images in the span folders in the flags. And this we're going to give a width attribute of 3 VW, and we're going to set a cursor to pointer. So the width will be 3 viewable width, so that should make it quite a bit smaller. And then the cursor pointer will make it so that when we hover over it, we get the little pointer finger instead of the arrow for our mouse icon, which will basically just make it appear as though it's a button or link that we can click on, without actually making it a button or link that we can click on. So if we save that, first off, so we're just going to create a new line under there, save that, refresh this page. So now you see our icons are up at the top. If we scroll down, it doesn't affect our menu. So it's similar to this one where we put that in the top left. This one we're putting in the top right. So that should look nice now, except the fact that we have the double icons, but we're going to fix that with JavaScript. Okay. So that's all we need for our CSS. Go back into our index, and we're going to need some PHP for this, or sorry, some JavaScript for this, and we're going to put that into our kind of core PHP file. So we have our language selected there. Just gonna give it a scripts title, js.equals to $, parentheses, pound, sorry, not pound. What we want to do is we want to put square brackets, ID caret, which is our shift 6, equals, and we want that to be our flag hyphen H hyphen flag hyphen H hyphen dot hide. So what this will do is automatically hide all of our flags that are supposed to be our hover effects. So now we only see the two. One of each. Perfect. So now the next line that we need is going to add our line break. Okay, so the next thing that we need now is we need to do something when we click on one. So this will need to be for each individual one. So pound flag hyphen en dot hover flag hyphen en hover inside the hover function parentheses curly bracers. Inside the curly bracers we go $ parentheses. Now to save us some time, and because we're probably going to be copying and pasting this one for each of the other languages, we can save a step by just typing this, which means this field. Dot hide and pound flag dash h dash en. When I say dash, I mean hyphen dot show. Okay, so this script will, when we hover on it, hide this one and show this one. So there's two functions. The first function is the mouse in, and the second function is the mouse out. So we have to go comma between our ending curly bracer and our ending parentheses and do another function call. And this one will be the opposite. And I always like to do the hiding effects before I do the showing effects, just in case there's a microsecond difference in the reading of those and the new one is loaded before the old one is removed, because then there can be a little bit more popping. I like to try to minimize popping. Okay, so now you can see when I hover over, it changes the image, and when I go out, it changes it back. Okay, so we can then go and add that for our Chinese one. And it's as simple as changing those E's to C's and saving. And refresh. we go. Now it works for both of those. But when we click on it, it still doesn't do anything. So in order to get that part to work, what we need to do is we need to change our htaccess file. So we're going to open that up. The first rewrite rule, we're going to copy and paste those first two and go back up to the first one and go to the plus sign and delete the plus sign and put in a set of curly bracers and the number 2. And do the same thing with that second one. So replacing the plus sign with a set of curly bracers and the number 2. Then change the P to an L. Okay, now copy from the first parenthesis to the / of that first rewrite rule. So all that, copy, and we're going to paste that into not the first two, but each of the other ones. So the other 4, so the first section of each line now of those 6 rewrite rules should all be like that. Then what we're going to do is we're going to change the P's in these these 4 into L's. Sorry, L's. L. Now these I's we're going to change to P's. And then from the last ampersand, P is equal to $2, copy that and paste that into the 2 above it, as well as into the last 2. And then for the last 2, change the last P is equal to 2 to an I is equal to 3. So ampersand's I is equal to $3 should be how the last 2 end. So basically what we did was we added an L get variable into the beginning of this, and to break these down again, this A-Z, capital A hyphen capital Z, 0-9 in square brackets with the plus sign after means any combination of lowercase, uppercase letters or numbers in any order and any amount between the 2 /. This one, where it's just lowercase a to lowercase z, means any combination of lowercase letters in any amount. This one, the first one, the new one that we added, lowercase a hyphen lowercase z, means any combination of letters from A to Z. And in the curly bracers we have the number 2. That means that it has to be 2 characters in length. If we had 2, 4, it could be between 2 and 4 characters. If we had 2, 8, 2 to 8, you get the idea. So if you get the idea. But we want it to be 2 characters for our country code, for our languages. So save that and change that to the change the P's to L's. And then the $JS is equal to single quotes. Change that to $lang is equal to $L semicolon. So what this will do is it will get from the URL that first variable, the L, and set that as our language. And then if our language isn't set, so if we didn't put it in the URL, then pull it from the user data, and if it's not in the user data, then set it to English by default. And then once we have it set, require the language file. So right now we have English, so if we save this, refresh, And if we go in here and type /en/, it should still work. Okay. So now what we want to do is we want to add a second language to test against. So we're doing Chinese. So go in here, and we're going to copy our en.php and paste it. It'll automatically name it with an _1, and we're just going to rename that to cn. So open that up, and the first thing we need to do, change this from English to Chinese. Change this from en to what our language code was for that, and if you remember, it was ZH hyphen capital H ANT. If it was simplified to Chinese, that last T would be an S instead. And then the only thing we have set up so far is that title, so I'm going to change the title, which fortunately I already have, which is why I chose Chinese for the first one. So save that. And now if we go to our website and we change the E to a C, hit enter, and you see that now the characters have changed to Chinese. So it's still kind of a blocky font, so the next thing I want to do is I want to probably go in and change what our fonts are, but for now we don't need to do that. So the next thing we need to do is now link our buttons to those functions. So we can close that for now. And in here, under our scripts, now, because we're showing and hiding our different flag ones, we don't want to set those as the actual buttons. What we want is the spans. So lang-ing dot click function, and inside the function, location.href set to https://35.ca/en/ copy paste. And now do the same thing for Chinese CN. And what this does is it literally the window location and a link. So it will literally just send you somewhere else. So now if I refresh this and I click the English one or the Chinese one, you'll note that it's just sending me to the different pages. And one other thing I want to note, that when we inspect our page, note that the language is English, And if I click on that, then it changes the language in the HTML tag. So that works. So now we just need to go through and create all of those for all of the other ones, and then go through and actually change what all these tags are. So I will start that process, and we will just do this in a quick time lapse because it will take quite some time.
When darkness falls, leaving shadows in the night, don't be afraid, wipe that fear from your eyes. The desperate love keeps on driving you around. Don't be afraid, you're not alone. You can run with us, we got everything you need. Run with us, we are free. Come with us, I see passion in your eyes. Run with us. When the cold wind blows, turn your collar to the coast. Don't be ashamed if you need someone to hold. If you're sinking in quicksand and it's dragging you down, and you feel you're going under, we'll be around. You can run with us, we got everything you need. Run with us, we are free. Come with us, I see passion in your eyes. Run with us. When you're behind closed doors, all alone by yourself, and you're longing inside to be somebody else. You pick up the telephone, and there's no one on the line. Don't be afraid, 'cause there's still time. You can run with us, we got everything you need. Run with us, we are free. Come with us, I see passion in your eyes. Run with us.
Okay, so I went through the home page, so the index.php, and I converted all the text into echoable constants. So I had to create a few extra, the username, password, keep alive, and the labels on the buttons for that login page. This is the login page. Now, if you noticed, I might have done something a little bit different here. Because this was already PHP code, instead of having to create new PHP code and echo, this has already created PHP code and echoed it. So all I did there was break into that using single quotes and dots and adding our constant in. So that's why those ones look different. Same with the admin there. Okay, and I'm hoping I didn't miss anything. And then I added all of the flags. I also changed the title up at the top in the actual title, so what is displayed in the tab in the browser. And then I went and created, well, first I went in and edited the English one to include our extra definitions that we needed, and then I copied those into the Chinese one, and then I went and created PHP pages for the other languages. Not sure what I changed there, so I'm just undoing it so I don't break anything. Sorry. Yeah, so that's what I did there. So now we can go and check out our page. If you refresh it, you should see all 5 flags. Now, one thing I noticed is that if I choose the Chinese one, the lettering is quite a bit larger and tends to cut off there. So what I might end up doing for this one is I might want to shrink down the size of my language buttons there. I just want to see what it looks like when I shrink it down. This is the problem. Once you get it really shrunken down, you don't want them to be too small that people can't actually click on them. Like as you can see there, they are actually pretty small. So the other thing I can probably do to fix this is maybe shift that name over. And I can do that by adding extra spaces to this title in the Chinese language one. Because the length of words is going to change drastically within the different languages. So going into here, basically I just want to add an extra space. And I might even need to add a no block space there. Sorry, non-breaking space. So that moved it over a little bit. More. Just moved over a little bit more. You can see the title up here is also the same. It's now in the Chinese characters. So, yeah. So now the next step from there is going through each of the pages, doing a similar thing. So we did the location page. Note that now when I click on location, that is broken. And the same is going to be for all of our menu items because we don't incorporate the language into them. So we need to fix that. So in order to do that, we go back into our index.php page, and we go down to our links, and between each of these echo lang. So we need an echo lang and a /. Copy. paste, 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 paste. Now the login and logout pages won't need that because that's direct script or direct link to a file, and the login page goes to our login box, so we won't need it there either. So the reg one is the one I'm looking for. So basically where it kicks you out, so that one just sends you back to the main page, but these ones send you to register. So in here we need to add a and because this is the header location with the double quotes, we need to make sure that we're using double quotes to break out of that. So as you can see, adding multilingual support is actually quite extensive, but I don't think anybody ever imagined that it wouldn't be. So now that we've added that lang, we need to make sure that that lang variable actually exists, because it won't. So there are two ways we can pass that. The first one, very simply, we're going to just create it here. Language. Everything else should be fine for this form. So that's our registration form. So then we go to our register page. So underneath country, we're going to copy that, paste that, now our icon choose I'm going to use this one, fa comment dots, because I kind of like that. If you want something else for language, I mean, you can just search for it. They actually have a language tag. So if you wanted to do that, you could. Sure. No, I'm still going to go through my comment dots. I like that one. Okay, and it's not going to be an input, it's going to be a select. Because I don't hate myself. The name is going to be language. No placeholder, no value. An opt group. Label is equal to language. This label is equal to language. An end tag for our opt group and an end tag for our select. And then in here, option. So So the value should be our 2-character language code. And then what we have in the drop down for our options, we're going to do the flag. So create an image, and then we're going to do a space, and then the name of the language. So image. Have to remind myself what we named that here. For English, it was GB. For Great Britain, here I'm just going to do a quick width so I don't have to create a whole class for it, and I'm just going to do a width of 20%. Honestly don't know what that's going to look like, but we will find out. So I can copy and paste this. That. Now, if you want to have each of these languages in their own language, you can do that, or you can have it, the reason why we don't need to do that is because we have the flags and people can identify the flags without needing to know what the language is. But you can also have it where once it changes, it will change the language in there too, so really doesn't matter. We're going to have to go through and change everything anyway. Okay, so now we have that set, and now I'm going to copy and paste this entire field from our div to our div, because when we go into our update, we're going to need to change that to in our account. Now you can choose which one you want to have selected as default. If nothing is selected as default, then the first one is always the default, and our default is English, so I don't need to put selected in there. You can also put these in any order you want them to be put in. There's no specific reason why I chose this order, except that I figured it would be in the order that the most people would be using it in. Alright, so save that. And we'll have to go in and do the same thing here that we did there. PHP, and we'll have to do a switch L. I believe I'm calling it C language. I will double check that in here. Not C lang. C lang. Okay, and then just double check that where this is kicking people out to. Everything looks right. Okay, so that one is done for now. This one. Create one of these for our language. So that was lang. Our language will not be encrypted. I believe I also called the username lang. Yeah. And this is going to be 13. 13. So all these messages are also going to have to be put in. Or all these messages are going to have to be pumped through a translator. It's going to be a lot of work. It's essentially for each language that you create, you're increasing the amount of work you have to do by half. So an extra 50% basically. Okay, so update cost. Where are we kicking people out to? Account. And in here we need to create a a lang variable as well. Okay, and we need to go back into the account page because we need to create JavaScript associated with that now. So the closest one to that would be province. So I'm going to copy my province JavaScript because that was another select box. And I'm going to paste that under the country. Language. Lang. Language value change if lang is equal to clang, change, replace, need to go into update cust, we're calling it language there, so we want this to be language. Language. Okay. Save that. Close that. Close that. Close that. Back to our main page. Let's go back to English for now. I go to create account. Okay, so it did not. So in here I did that mistake again. So this is what I was avoiding when I did these ones, but I accidentally put that in here. So for these ones here, we don't need to echo it. We need to break out like that. Fix that. Did I do that silly thing anywhere else? Yes, in here. Okay, try this again, refresh, create account, language. Okay, it's not showing those icons, so let's go back and see why. Okay, so unfortunately there's no real easy way in order to get flags to show up in a select box. So there's a different way that we can do it. Basically, very similar to what we did for the actual flags at the top there. Oh. Don't know why they did that. And basically that's what we can do for our buttons at the bottom. So what we do is we go into our index.php page, and this span, this div with our flags, we're just going to copy that div, paste that into the select over top the select. So we're going to change this div to a span. We're going to change the ID from flags to language. Select language. And then we're just going to put each of these onto a single line. Okay, so then this span, I'm going to give a class of form control. And save that. Now if I refresh that, go down to the bottom. So now we have our flags. They are sticking out. So in the image tag for each one, we're just going to test this. Okay, so we can delete that height. Save that. Okay, so we just need to create some CSS for this select language. So we go into CSS and select language. And then span image. And height is 100%. refresh that. We get that. And we also want to go cursor pointer. And above this, select language span margin is 0, padding is 0. And select language. Comma. And we're going to go with text align center. Get rid of the text align center. Okay, go back to register. Okay. See if that makes it. Yeah. I have to go with view width. Which is fine. Okay. So I just wanted these ones spaced out a little bit more. now I'm just changing the IDs because on this register page, it still loads on the same page as our actual language selection buttons at the top, so they can't share the same IDs. Okay, so we're getting some flickering. Sometimes it doesn't actually change, and that's because of the way that we have these set up, where they're selecting the actual images. We don't want them to do that. We want them to select the span, which is the parent element. So we just need to change these from flag to lang. So lang hover and then this would be flag dash en hide and that show. Just testing it on that first one. Refresh. No more weird flickering. And as you can see down at the bottom here, the style is just switching which one gets display none. And that's what we want. And a quick way you can go about changing that is with Control H, the replace function. So we want to replace this with that. And then replace. You can replace all, but that might be a little scary, so I like to just do it one at a time. Okay, but they're not all English, so we'll go through. And again here. This was YK instead of UK. So a typo. Always a typo. Beautiful. That's a lot better. Okay, that's nice and clean and crisp. Okay, so we have that there, and we're going to fix these guys at the bottom here.
I think it's time to blow this scene. Get everybody in the stuff together. Okay, 3, 2, 1, let's jam.
Okay, so what we have in the end is we have this little language box. We have little language icons that when we hover over them, they switch the icon to the shiny one, which basically just gives it a white to black gradient over top of it. And if you notice, we have a choose language field beside this. So what happens is when we select one of these, it will put the flag and the name of the flag in the field beside it. And then we have this sets that when we scale it down, it will actually pop that second field below. And note when you click on those, it doesn't actually change the current language, it just changes the language in here. These ones will change the language up there. But it also boots you back to the main page. If we actually wanted, we could set these so that they don't kick us out of the page that we're in. So basically, here. So we create a thing right above our, or right at the bottom of our languages here. We'll go with JSLR for JavaScript language redirect. Set to if P exists, is set to nothing. If P exists, JSLR dot equal to P dot / semicolon. If P and I JSLR dot equal to I dot / semicolon. The reason why we're doing P and I in this one instead of just I is because if I exists but P doesn't, something's gone horribly wrong. Somebody's trying to muck with us, and we don't want to let that happen. So we just reject that I, and if there was no P, it would reject that too, and would be back to blank. So then here, we basically dot out and JSLR, copy this, and paste that into each of those. Save that. So now if I change to my Chinese one, I'm still in my register page, so it doesn't make me switch pages. If you had anything filled out here, it will reset the form, but it won't kick you out of the registration page. So saves you that one step. Okay, so we have our language chooser. That works, and then what this actually gives us, if we inspect it, this one here, so language. This is actually being set every time we click on something. Or at least it would if I could spell. Okay, so now the language changes each time, and that's what we pull forward into our form and set our language. Okay, so now we need a couple more steps before this is completely finished. First, we need to copy this into we need to create a way of detecting which one is the default. So if language is set, then we need to switch lang. Okay. So for each case, okay. So if French is set as our current language, we're going to add a JavaScript that says click the French button and then breakout. That's all we're doing. We're going to copy that and make one for each. And you notice I didn't start with English, and that's because I'm creating a default, and the default is going to be English. And we don't need the break after that. Okay, so one big thing I want to point out here, bug I found trying to get all this stuff to work, because we keep calling this lang variable, and then we call it here to pull up our language page, then when we go into our individual language pages, we're setting a new lang variable as the language code. And then if we try to call the lang variable somewhere else, it's being changed sometimes, like in the case of Chinese here. So we don't want to call this one lang. We want to call this one language because we want to keep our variables separate. That was a big mistake I made. So we need to go back through each of our definition pages and change all of the langs to language, and then on our index.php at the very top where it says HTML lang is equal to, that one we're going to change to language. So change that, save that, and go through each of these. Okay, so yes, now it works. So now if we change our language, it automatically sets that language there. Google Translate will even pop up and give us translations if we like for setting our page into a different language, because it thinks that I speak English and it knows that this website is in Ukrainian. So it will actually pop that up for me, which is nice. Translate this page. So yes, that works now. Okay, so now that this actually completely works, we can go ahead and copy that into the next one. But first I'll go over everything that we did. Okay, so first in our Highway 45 PHP, just a brief overview. So we added our L for language. That gets picked up. We have our JavaScript is equal to blank, language is equal to L, so we're setting the lang variable to whatever we picked up from that L. Then we're checking if the lang is blank, so if we don't have a language set in our URL, then it'll check our customer information, so our account information, to see if we have a language set there. If there is, we'll set that to it, and this will only happen if we didn't set it in the URL. So the URL will overwrite anything else. If we don't have anything set in our account, so basically if we're not logged in, then it will basically set it to English by default. So if we don't have it set there, if we're not logged in, it will set it to English by default. Then it will require to choose a language file based on that, and that pulls up our definitions, which will basically be where we translate our keywords into actual text with the different languages. So then we have this JSLR is equal to blank, and then if P, so if we have a page, then we add the page and a forward slash. If we have both page and item, then we will add the item as well, and that comes down here. So through this first line, this first script, is anything with an ID of flag-h- will be hidden. So on our index page, where we have these guys, the H or the flag-h are the hover ones. So we have two images here within each of these spans. The spans are basically acting like our buttons, and then inside that we have one visible image. So either the flag or the flag-h. And we hide the -h by default, and then when we hover over the span, it will switch them. So it will hide the first one and show the second one. When we hover, or when we take the mouse off, it'll switch back. And that's what this line does. So Lang English, which is this span right here, when we hover over it, it will hide that first flag and show the second flag, and then when we come off of it, it will reverse that. It will hide the hover one and show the normal one. And then we do that for each language: English, French, German, Ukrainian, and Chinese. Then this next set, when we click on any of those spans, it will take us to the site. So it basically refreshes it and adds in the language code that we've clicked on, and then it will use this variable, which basically checks to see if we had a page and an item in there, and if so, it will restore those, so that way it doesn't just kick us back to the main page and we can kind of keep going from where we left off. Like I said, if you're in the middle of filling out a form, it will clear the form because it is refreshing the page. But other than that, it should work, and nothing else is really changed on that page. For our CSS, we had to create this flags, which has a position absolute, top 0, right 0, padding 0, margin 0, z index of 3, line height 0.5 viewable width, and font size 0.5 viewable width. We basically just want to shrink everything down, and that is the main div for our flags up here. So that's the thing that they're in, and it basically pops them up into the top right corner and makes them take up as little space as we can. CSS. The flag span, same thing, so margin 0 space 1px, so 0 for the height, 1 pixel for the width, just giving them a little bit of separation there, and padding is nothing, and then flags space span space image, width of 3 VW, so that controls the size of our flags, and then setting the cursor to pointer, so that way when we put our mouse over them, it changes the cursor from the normal arrow into the little finger, which is the same as if it was a button or a link. Then we have our select language, which is basically our flags, but within our forms. So we'll have the two forms. We can use the same IDs for both form fields, because you'll never see both form fields on the page at the same time. It'll either be one or the other, so we can reuse the IDs. We can't use these IDs together, so we can't use flags for these ones because the flags at the top corner and these ones in our form will be on the same page at the same time, and therefore they would override each other and cause issues, especially with JavaScript, so we have to give them separate IDs. So for these, we went with select language, margin and padding of 0, span, margin 0, space 1 VW. So very similar, except instead of pixels, we went with a VW. Padding of 1 pixel, so we gave it a little bit of padding. And then with the image, height 100%, so instead of setting a width, we went with the height. So we wanted the height to fill the full height of the form field, and then cursor pointer again. Then selected language. So this is basically the one that has been clicked on. The width for that box is 100%, height 46 pixels, line height 42 pixels, font size 24 pixels, padding 2 pixels, margin auto, font style italic, that's personal preference, you don't have to have that if you don't want, and text line center, which I don't even know if that actually worked. I don't think it did. And then selected lang space image, height 42 pixels. So this controls the size of the flags in the one that's selected. So now if we go to that and we take a look at it, we're talking about this field here. So we have these buttons, and this is that second set of CSS. So when we hover over, it changes, and the one that we click on then comes up in this box. So how did we get all of that? Going to our register page. So first we did have to add quite a bit of code to it. Make sure I cover everything. So the very first thing I did was where we had all of these change functions for each one, I added one for the language because we didn't have that there. We'll go down and start with the actual form field. Okay, so basically the first two are kind of standard. So we have the form group, then we have the input add-on group. I used the file comment dots as the icon. Then I put in a hidden input field with a name of language and an ID of set language, because again, I wasn't sure if we had used an ID of language somewhere else, and I wanted to make sure it was unique, but I want language as the name, and then value I set as lang. So it will automatically be set based on what the current language is when you load the page. And that way it goes through all of our previous prerequisites and we don't have to mess with that. So then the next one is slightly different. So first I have a span with a class call -md-6. So that's a medium column that is 6. Remember, that's out of 12 possible spaces. So that's basically taking up half the space. And then I embedded a style in here of just padding 0 and margin 0. And this is so that this class doesn't create padding or margins. So that way when our next one comes in, the form control, this box doesn't get messed up. Otherwise, if you look in, if you look in here, our box is normal, right? It looks like any of the normal input boxes that we have. This won't look like that if you have a margin. Basically that outline will come in here and it'll be off-centered. So in order to keep that shape, if you're adding these things, you need to make sure that they have 0 padding and 0 margins. Okay, so then the next span is class form control and giving it the ID select language. And then we have these spans here, each of which are basically copied from our flags at the top. So we have spans with IDs. I kept the same IDs except I added an R hyphen. So instead of lang ing, it's R hyphen lang hyphen ing, and so on. The image is the same, and then these, instead of, so for the images they had IDs, I changed those IDs to classes, because you can only have one ID unique, but classes do not have to be unique. So I just changed these ones to classes to keep it simple. We don't want to set the other ones to classes and then modify that, because then if you click on one, it would actually highlight the one at the bottom and highlight the one at the top, and you get into a mess. So but instead of, I could have kept this as ID and then put R hyphen again, but I just went with class because it seemed to make more sense at the time. And then the H one, so the hover one. So very similar to how it looks at the top in our index.php here. Very similar to that. It's just I kind of have them straight out across instead of broken down. It's just straight across. And then after that, so closing both of those spans, and then another span with a class called MD6, so a medium 6. Remember those two initials in the middle. You have extra small, small, medium, large, extra large, and then 2x, 3x, and up. That size is just, no wait, sorry, it stops at extra large. I'm thinking of the font awesome sizes, sorry about that. It goes from extra small to extra large. And those are the screen sizes. So basically why I chose MD was because the number of flags that I have, if I take this and I start scaling it down, now the flags are set to be a specific viewable width, so they will shrink down depending on the size of the screen width. At least they should. They don't actually appear to be changing in size whatsoever. But basically I just scrolled down until I made sure that this was popping down and these weren't popping down. So what I mean is here these are all still straight in a line. If this took up too much space, then China would then be cut and go down to the next line, and then I would have two rows of flags, and that's what I was trying to avoid. I want all my flags on one line. So when I had small, it was doing that. In fact, I can change this to small just to show you what I'm talking about. Refresh. So now, yeah, like that, right? So it allows me to keep scrolling, and then it waits until I get to the extra small size before it actually pops underneath. So instead of being on the side, each one is then placed in a new row, and then we have more space. But until then, yeah, it'll pop that down onto the next line, and then it just messes everything up. So visually, you want to make sure that those are all kept in the same row. So depending on how many languages you have, you may need to adjust that. You can even make the flags smaller if you need to fit them all on one line. If you're doing a lot of languages and you need them to take up multiple lines, there are ways where you can get this to actually stretch automatically and allow you to do it without it making that weird pop down thing. I'm not going to go into that because we don't need to. But if you search it or just contact me, I can walk you through that on a case-by-case basis. Okay, so anyway, medium worked. Medium worked. If you don't want it to be side by side and you just want one to be over the other, then you can remove this span, this one and this one, and just have the second span, and then it will just put one on top of the other straight up. Just give this span all that fixed it for centering. Okay, back to register. So anyway, then this one has span class form control again. ID selected lang. I have choose a language in there by default. That will only ever show up if the user doesn't. Actually, this should never show up. It should just be placeholder text, and you shouldn't see it at any point. But I wanted something in there to kind of preserve the space when I was testing. But this text will get replaced by our JavaScript. And then we have the label at the bottom with language. So mainly we have our buttons here. When you click on one, it will change appearance. It will set something to the field below it or beside it, depending on the orientation of the page, and change this value here, which is hidden, which is what gets submitted in the form. So now looking at our scripts. So the first thing we did is we added the JavaScript that hides all of our hover images, because we have 2 images for each country, or each language I should say. And because we changed it from an ID to a class, using this is basically how you do a wildcard. So this can be either ID or class. In this case, I'm looking for classes because I changed them to class. And then you have the caret equals and what you want it to look for. So this will look for anything that starts with flag -h- and is a class. So any class that starts with flag -h. If you want it where it ends with that, or it has that in the middle, you can change the caret to an asterisk, and then it will just look to see if it contains this. If you're having issues with this, you might need to put it in this part into quotes, but because we're using PHP, which uses the single quotes, and our JavaScript uses the double quotes, we now need to resort to our third set of quotes, which is basically you need to use single quotes again. However, to not muck with our PHP, you need to escape it first. So basically you do a backslash and then single quote. And then you would do backslash single quote. And NetBeans knows that that is just another type of single quote, but different from this set of single quotes. So when you backspace, it will delete both characters at once. So be aware of that. Don't hit backspace twice trying to delete both of them, because you'll end up deleting other characters. So anyway, any class that starts with flag hyphen h hyphen, and hide it. Then this set of JavaScript, just like with our ones from the index page, it will, when you hover over it, it will hide the first one, show the second one, hide the first one, or hide the second one, show the first one when you take your finger off of it. And then these ones for clicking. So with this, the selected language, which is selected lang, ID selected lang, so that's this span here. So selected lang.html. So what this does is the tag with this ID, it will put whatever you put into this, so within the parentheses and the quotes, it will put that between the tags. So where this is a span tag, it'll put it between the span tags. That's what the HTML does. It'll write HTML to that tag, so placing it between the two tags. So we're going to create an image src, and you notice the src I had to put quotes in. So like I said, I had to escape those quotes because I already have single quotes here and double quotes here for PHP and JavaScript consecutively. So I had to use escaped single quotes for this, and the URL with the default English flag there, and then a space and the word English. Then I add the script set language, which is our hidden input, and I give that a value of en. And then I went and did that for each of the languages: French, German, Ukrainian, Chinese. Change the image, change the value. Then the last thing I did is I said if our language in PHP is set, then switch that language. So if it is French, then create this JavaScript code. If it's German, Ukrainian, or Chinese, do that by default. So if it's none of those, then we're doing the English one. And basically what these JavaScripts do, sorry, I changed this one, but I don't actually need to change that one. I was having issues and trying to figure out why. So basically what it does is it just clicks on the link. So a quick way to have it select which one you need it to is just having the computer click the link for you. And I did a timeout there too. I don't need those timeouts. Okay, so going back in here, refresh. That changes, and if we inspect, see this value there will change, and you can actually see as I click on this, it will highlight the parts that are changing. So the span here, which contains this image and name, is changing. So you can see the image is changing and the text there is changing, which is this part. And then it's changing our value. Okay. So now I will go and add that to our other page. So we need account and update cust ahead language, which is all we need there. Okay, so where we had our easy little select box here, I'm just going to delete that whole thing out, copy it from our register page. And then go up to our scripts. Now with the account page, we already created a language script to check for the language. So we're going to have to do more work in here now because it's not as simple as that anymore. So we will want all of this part. Copy, go to our account, paste that in. This part we keep the exact same, this part we keep the same. And I believe we don't actually have a language anymore. That is now set language. So this becomes set language. Change set language value. Set language parent. And set language parent. There we go. Basically, all we need to change in this is after we change the set language value in these fields, we need to then call the change function. So dot change, and we add that to each of these. And that should be everything we need to do for this one. So I'm just going to double check that. And I already found something we need to update. So our login page going to our index page, we need to go down to the bottom where our login is. And we'll put it, keep it concise. So underneath our form, we need to create a input. Type is equal to hidden. Name is equal to language. We're not going to give it an ID because we don't need to muck it up with other IDs. Value is equal to PHP echo lang. Save that. Go to our login. Copy the username. Paste that. Change this to lang. Change this to language. Lang there. And then here we can just go .lang. So that way, if there was something set in the language, it will go there. If nothing was set, it will just go back. Save that out. That's fine. Okay. So now I'm just going to, I did fix it, so I know that it's fixed. I'm just going to go straight in. Okay. So language is English. And we can change these, and they change on there. And if I inspect that, we can see that the language does indeed change. Perfect. So that will submit, and then it will pick up the language which we have set. Okay, so now go back into here. And we need to make sure that it's adding those to the database in both cases. So we don't need our register. We don't need that anymore. We don't need count. Now we need to look at our update cust and our reg. So we pull up our language. We got that. Check this one. We got our language there. We check to see if lang is in there. And then here, if language, did we call it language or did we call it lang? We called it lang. Bad on me. If lang exists, then lang is set to lang. Okay, that page is good. Double check this one. So our registration page, we get our post lang from language. We know it will check it. We could check to make sure it's not empty there. But basically, if lang is not set, then lang is set to en. We'll just set it to English by default. And then we need to add it in here. So after PC, lang, before our reg IP, and then in our values, after PC, so add a comma, then we need a pair of single quotes, inside the single quotes, double quotes, inside the double quotes, pair of dots, and inside those, lang. Okay, save that, close that. Okay. Now, last step, we need to go into our database and our customers and structure. And we need to add a field after PC. Go. And this is lang, all lowercase, and it will be a tiny text. There we go. Length of 2. Default as defined en, collation UTF-8. I shouldn't have to put anything else in. Now, I didn't have to put an actual default in because our code really does that for us. This is just a nice little backup, but the reason why I put a default in there is if you ever add fields to your database after the fact, so after you already have customers or fields for it, it's a good idea to put in a default because that is what it will put for all the existing ones. So when you create the new field, all the existing ones will get the default value. So I don't have to go in and manually change each of the previously added customers and give them a language. It will automatically just set them to that default of English. Okay, so now the only thing left to do is go through the long process of taking each of these words and switching them out in our language files and creating shortcut variables for them, the constants, and changing them out for what we want to call them in the language. So yeah, that will be a long process. I'm not going to do it online. I'm going to do it offline and be done by the time we start on the next video, because this is just going to take a while. And it's going to be boring. Very, very boring. Yeah, so I will see you guys in the next video.